Sundar Pichai's son is bullied at school. His next move leaves everyone stunned. The rain was falling quietly outside, as Sundar sat at the dinner table. His son Arav across from him, head bent, pushing his food around. The boy had barely spoken a word all evening. Sundar, usually patient and gentle, felt something heavy in his chest. It wasn't just a bad day, he thought. It was something else. Double quotes RAV, he said softly. Is everything okay at school? At first, the boy didn't look up. Then his hands froze. He blinked fast and a tear slipped down his cheek. Sundar leaned forward, alarm rising inside him. Talk to me, son, he whispered. A finally spoke, voice cracking. They call me names, Papa, every day. They push me. They laugh. They say I don't belong here. The words hit Sundar like stones. He reached out and took his son's hands in his. Who does this to you? Arav shook his head. Everyone. It feels like everyone. That night, after Arav had gone to bed, Sundar sat alone in the dark living room. He was known around the world as the CEO of one of the biggest tech companies. People respected him. Millions watched his speeches. But right now, he felt powerless. The next morning, he walked his son to school. He wanted to see for himself. As they approached the gate, Arav gripped his father's hand tighter, eyes darting nervously. Sundar noticed a group of boys nearby, whispering and smirking. One of them, a tall boy with a cruel grin, called out loud enough for everyone to hear. Oh, look, it's the rich loser and his daddy. What, you need him to protect you now? Arav froze, his face pale. Sundar could feel the tension in the air. Parents around them glanced and quickly looked away. For a moment, Sundar's hands trembled. But then he straightened, his voice calm. Say your name, he told the tall boy. The boy sneered. Why? So you can call your lawyers? I'm not scared. Of you? Sundar simply nodded and walked his son into the school. But inside his mind, something had already started to take shape. A plan. Later that day, Sundar asked the school principal for a meeting. The principal smiled politely but kept checking his watch, as though Sundar's concern was just another complaint. We take bullying very seriously, the principal said flatly. But kids will be kids. They grow out of it. Sundar leaned forward, his eyes steady. If you do nothing, he said, I will handle this myself. But the way I handle it may surprise you. The principal blinked, a little rattled, but he still didn't take Sundar seriously. The next few days passed quietly. Sundar acted as though nothing had happened. But at home, late at night, he worked on something in secret. On Friday, he told Arav, tomorrow, we're going back to school, but not like before. Arav looked confused and a little afraid. What do you mean, Papa? Sundar just smiled faintly. Trust me, he said. This time it will be different. And then next morning came. They walked into the school gymnasium where the students were gathered for an assembly. Sundar stood in front of the microphone. The room fell silent. He began to speak, his voice soft but strong. Every one of you here has a story, he said, and today I want to tell you mine. Students stared, whispering. Even the tall boy from earlier sat down, watching him with narrowed eyes. When I was your age, Sundar continued, I lived in a tiny house with one fan, no phone, and no idea where life would take me. I was shy. I was quiet. People mocked me. But I learned something important. Just as he was about to finish the sentence, the gym doors slammed open, and the tall boy stood up, shouting, You think your story makes you better than us? You don't belong here either. Gasps filled the room. Arav froze in his seat, staring at his father. Sundar's eyes darkened slightly, and for the first time in years, anger flashed across his face. He slowly turned toward the boy and said, in a tone that silenced even the teachers, maybe it's time someone showed you what respect really means. The room fell quiet. And then, without warning, Sundar stepped down from the stage and began walking straight toward the boy. The gym was utterly still. You could hear the sound of the rain starting outside, soft and distant, But inside, every eye was fixed on Sundar. The tall boy who only seconds earlier had shouted now stood frozen, his smirk slowly fading. Sundar's footsteps echoed on the polished floor as he walked calmly toward him, not breaking eye contact. No one dared to speak. Even the teachers, who usually rushed to intervene in moments like these, hesitated. Unsure what was about to happen, Dada Rav sat rigid in his seat, hands clenched tightly on his knees. His stomach twisted with fear and something else too. Strange, cautious hope. He had never seen his father like this before. Sundar, who always spoke softly, who always forgave quickly, who never raised his voice at home, now carried himself with a quiet authority that even the cruelest boys couldn't mock. When Sundar finally stopped, he stood so close to the boy that the boy instinctively took a step back. But Sundar didn't raise his hand, didn't even raise his voice. Instead, he spoke low, but every word seemed to carry weight enough to fill the whole room. I don't want you to fear me, he began. I want you to understand me. When I was your age, I used to sit at the back of the classroom because I was too shy to speak. My classmates laughed at my accent. They laughed at my clothes. They laughed at the way I looked down at my shoes when someone asked me a question. He paused, his gaze never leaving the boys. But one day, Sundar continued, one teacher said something to me I have never forgotten. He said, you don't have to be the loudest person in the room to be the strongest. A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The tall boy glanced around now, as though unsure whether to keep sneering or to listen. I don't know what pain you carry, Sundar said gently. But I know this hurting others doesn't make yours go away. I didn't come here to humiliate you. I came here to remind you, all of you, that respect begins when you see the humanity in someone else. The boy swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the floor. Sundar placed a hand on his shoulder, then, not harsh but firm. Today is the day you decide what kind of man you want to become, Sundar told him. And I hope you choose better than this. He turned back toward the microphone and addressed the rest of the room. You think words don't leave scars? He asked, his voice a little louder now, carrying into the farthest corners of the gym. Look at my son. Every night, I see him sit quietly at dinner, too ashamed to tell me what happened to him. You think he will forget the things he said? He won't, but he will grow strong because of them. And one day he will forgive you. The silence was so deep that it felt heavy in everyone's chest. Sundar's words seemed to hang in the air like something sacred, too big and too real to ignore. Then, slowly, something unexpected happened. Another boy, smaller than the tall one, but from the same group, stood up. His face was red, and he spoke. With a shaky voice, I'm sorry, he said, looking straight at Arav. I just didn't want them to pick on me too. And then another girl raised her hand. Me too, she said softly. I shouldn't have laughed. Arav stared at them, stunned. He could feel something breaking inside. Him, not pain this time, but relief, mingled with confusion. But before Sundar could respond, the tall boy suddenly pulled away, his face dark and angry. You don't know me? The boy spat. You don't know anything about my life. You think your fancy words change anything? You think just because you're rich, people have to listen to you? He stormed out of the gym, shoving past the teachers who finally began moving toward him. The door banged shut behind him, and whispers rose up in the room. Sundar stood there quietly for a long moment, watching the closed doors. His expression was unreadable, but his hands, resting at his sides, curled into fists before slowly. Unclencang. Then he turned back to the students and said simply, This isn't the end. It's the beginning. Remember what happened here today. He nodded once, stepped down from the stage completely, and walked toward the exit where Arav was waiting, still looking overwhelmed and unsure what to feel. When they got outside, the rain had stopped, but the sky was still heavy and gray. Sundar put a hand on Arav's shoulder, and for the first time all morning, he allowed himself to smile a little. How are you feeling? He asked softly. Arav looked up at him, his voice small but steadier than before. Like people finally saw me. Sundar's smile widened, but Just as he was about to speak, he noticed something strange. Out of the corner of his eye, across the street, the tall boy stood under a tree, his back to them. But he wasn't alone. There was a man standing with him, a man Sundar didn't recognize. The man was gripping the boy's arm tightly, speaking in a harsh tone. Even from here, Sundar could see the boy flinch. The man glanced up suddenly and locked eyes with Sundar. There was something cold and sharp in that look, something that sent a chill down Sundar's spine. Then the man turned away, pulling the boy with him, and disappeared down the street. Sundar stood there, staring after them, a knot forming in his stomach. He didn't know why, but he had a feeling this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Asterisk, the ride home that day was quiet, but not heavy like before. Arav sat in the passenger seat, looking out the window, his fingers drumming softly on his knee. His mind seemed far away, but there was a different kind of silence now, not filled with shame or fear, but with questions. Sundar glanced at him a few times as he drove. He wanted to ask what Arav was thinking, but he sensed the boy needed time. So he let the car hum along the wet streets, the windshield wipers making their slow, rhythmic sweep. Finally, as they neared home, Arav spoke. His voice was hesitant, but more alive than Sundar had heard it in weeks. "Papa," he said, "why did you talk to them like that? Why didn't you get angry? You could have told the teachers to punish them. You could have yelled at that boy." Sundar thought for a long moment before answering. "Because anger only teaches them to fear," he said quietly. "And fear never lasts. But if they see what respect looks like, if they see what courage really means, maybe they'll remember." Arav turned his gaze back to the window, thinking over his father's words. But Sundar's own thoughts were elsewhere. He couldn't stop replaying the moment outside the school, the man with the boy under the tree. There had been something in the man's eyes, something cruel and calculating, and the way the boy had flinched at his touch. Sundar knew that kind of fear. He had seen it in people before, the kind that runs deeper than schoolyard teasing. The kind that comes from home. That night, after Arav had gone to bed, Sundar sat in his study, staring at his laptop. He tried to focus on work, on emails, on numbers, but his mind kept drifting back to that man and the boy. Finally, he closed the laptop. He couldn't let it go. He needed to understand what he had seen. The next morning, he decided to walk Arav to school again. As they reached the gates, Sundar scanned the area. The tall boy wasn't there. Neither was the man. But he caught a few students glancing at him and then quickly looking away, whispering as the bell rang and the students filed inside. Sundar stayed back, leaning against the fence, and that's when he noticed her, a woman standing quietly near a tree, watching the children. Her clothes were neat but plain, her eyes tired and weary. She didn't look like a teacher or a parent waiting to drop off a child. She looked like someone keeping watch. Sundar approached her slowly. She stiffened as he came closer, clutching her bag tighter. "Good morning," he said gently. "I saw you here yesterday too. Are you waiting for someone?" Her eyes darted away, then back to him. After a long silence, she spoke. "My nephew," she said, her voice low. "He's having trouble at home." "His father?" She stopped, swallowing hard, as though she couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. Sundar nodded, understanding more than she said. "He was the boy in the gym yesterday?" The woman hesitated, then nodded. "I'm his aunt," she added. "He doesn't want anyone to know. His father, he's not a kind man. But the boy thinks if he stands tall at school, no one will notice how small he feels at home." Sundar's chest tightened. Now the pieces were starting to fit. The cruelty, the anger, the defensiveness, it wasn't just about Arav. It was about something much deeper, much darker. "What's his name?" Sundar asked softly. "Double quotes Dev," she said. "His name is Dev." The name hung in the air between them for a long moment. "Is there anything I can do?" Sundar asked. The woman shook her head quickly. "Please," she said, her voice almost a whisper now. "Don't get involved. You don't know his father. He doesn't forget. He doesn't forgive. With that, she turned and walked away before Sundar could say more. The rest of the day passed uneasily. Sundar tried to focus on his meetings, his calls, but his mind kept returning to Dev, to that haunted look in his eyes, to the man gripping his arm too tightly. That evening at dinner, Arav spoke up again. Papa, he said suddenly. Dev didn't come to school today. No one knows where he is. Sundar's fork froze halfway to his mouth. Did the teacher say anything? Just that he's sick, Arav said. But some kids said they heard yelling when they passed his house last night, really loud yelling, and glass breaking. Sundar felt a cold heaviness settle in his chest. He put down his fork and wiped his hands slowly. Arav, he said carefully, if you hear anything else, you tell me right away, okay? Arav nodded, looking worried now. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Sundar sat in the living room in the dark, his phone in his hand. His thumb hovered over the screen for a long time. He knew he should leave it alone. It wasn't his business, he told himself. But deep down, he knew he couldn't. He opened a search engine and typed in the boy's name, Dev's full name. And that's when he saw it. A local news article from a year ago. A small headline. Man arrested for assault, released on bail. Child Services contacted. The photo showed the same man he had seen under the tree. His face, hard and cold even in the mugshot. Sundar's stomach turned. He scrolled down, reading the details, each one worse than the last dot, and then, just as he set the phone down, there was a knock at the door. A loud, urgent knock. He froze, staring at the door. The clock on the wall read just past midnight. The knock came again, harder this time. He rose slowly, his heart pounding now, and moved toward the door. Through the frosted glass, he could just barely make out the shadow of a figure standing. Outside, he unlocked the door and pulled it open, and there stood Dev, his face bruised, his lip bleeding, his eyes wide and desperate. Please, the boy whispered hoarsely. Please, you have to help me. He's coming. Asterisk, the boy's words hung in the air like a sharp wind cutting through the quiet night. Please, you have to help me. He's coming. Sundar stood frozen, staring at Dev. The boy's small frame shook where he stood on the porch, his shirt torn at the sleeve, his cheeks streaked with tears and rain. His eyes darted over Sundar's shoulder, as though expecting someone to appear from the darkness behind him. Sundar stepped aside immediately. Come in, he said, his voice low but firm. Dev hesitated only a second before darting inside. Sundar shut the door quickly and turned the deadbolt. Outside, the street was quiet, the street lamp humming faintly. The air heavy with something he couldn't quite name. Inside, Dev stood near the wall, arms wrapped around himself. His breath came fast and shallow. Sundar crouched down in front of him, speaking softly. You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you here. Tell me what happened. For a few moments, Dev couldn't speak. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Sundar reached for a blanket, draped over the sofa, and gently wrapped it around his shoulders. Finally, in a trembling voice, Dev whispered, he found out about yesterday. About what you said to me. He said I embarrassed him. He was waiting for me when I got home. The boy's voice cracked, and he buried his face in his hands. Sundar felt anger simmering in his chest, but he forced his tone to stay calm. And then, he asked gently. Dev lowered his hands, his eyes glassy and wet. He said, if I ever went back to school, if I ever spoke to anyone about him, he'd make me sorry. And then he started breaking things, and I just ran. Sundar's jaw tightened. He had suspected the truth, but hearing it out loud from the boy himself still struck him hard. He took a slow breath, choosing his next words carefully. Does your aunt know you're here? Dev shook his head quickly. She tried to stop him, Dev said. But he pushed her too. She told me to go. To run. Just then, footsteps came down the stairs behind them. Arav appeared, rubbing his eyes, still in his pajamas. Papa? He murmured sleepily. Then he noticed Dev standing there, wrapped in the blanket, and his expression shifted to surprise and worry. What happened? Arav asked quietly. Sundar rose and put a hand on his son's shoulder. Go back to bed, he said gently. It's okay. We're just helping Dev. But Arav stayed where he was, his gaze fixed on Dev. After a long moment, he walked closer, reached out and placed his small hand on Dev's. You can stay. Arav said simply. Something in Dev's face softened then, and for the first time since arriving. He nodded faintly. Sundar guided both boys to the living room and sat them on the sofa. He handed Dev a glass of water and sat across from him, his mind racing. He knew what he should do. Call the police, report everything, let the system handle it. But he also knew the system. It moved slowly. And sometimes it didn't move at all. And as he sat there, he realized something else. If he called the police now, the man might come looking for Dev before help arrived. And if Sundar was right about him, he wouldn't come. Quietly, he rose to his feet and picked up his phone. But before he could dial, there was a loud bang at the door. The sound made both boys flinch. Sundar's blood went cold. Another bang. Harder this time. The sound of a fist hammering against the wood. Open up. A deep, angry voice shouted from outside. I know he's in there. Dev went rigid on the couch, his knuckles white as he gripped the blanket. Arav instinctively slid closer to him. Sundar set the phone down, moved to the door, and peered through the peephole, and there he was. The man from the schoolyard, standing on his porch, his face twisted in fury. His head clenched into fists. No, you can hear me? The man growled. That boy is mine. You've got no right to keep him. Open this door, or I swear you'll regret it. Sundar didn't move. He kept his voice calm and steady. You need to leave, he said through the door. He's safe here. You won't hurt him again. The man slammed his palm against the door so hard the wood shuddered. You think you can tell me what to do? The man barked. You think just because you're some big shot CEO, you can take my boy away? He's my son. Mine. Inside, Dev's breath came faster now, his whole body shaking. Arav wrapped an arm around his shoulder. Trying to calm him, Sundar closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them and spoke louder. If you don't leave now, he warned, I will call the police, and I promise you, they'll take this very seriously. For a second there was silence. Then the man's voice came again, lower this time, but even more dangerous. You think this is over? He hissed. You don't know me. I don't care about your money, your name, your police. I always get what's mine. You hear me? Always. Then came the sound of footsteps retreating down the steps, followed by the growl of an engine starting. Outside, Sundar stood still until the headlights disappeared down the street. Only then did he release the breath he'd been holding. He turned around and saw the two boys staring at him. He's gone, Sundar said softly. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. That man wasn't the kind to walk away. He would be back, and next time, Sundar feared, he would not come alone. Sundar walked over to the boys, knelt down and looked Dev straight in the eyes. Listen to me, he said. You're not going back there? Not tonight. Not ever. Do you understand? Dev nodded faintly, though fear still flickered in his eyes. Sundar rose to his feet and stared out the window into the dark street beyond. He had stood up to boardrooms full of billionaires. He had stood before cameras and the world's press. But somehow, standing here now, he felt more determined and more vulnerable than ever before. Because this wasn't about business. This was about a boy who needed him. He turned to the boys and said, Both of you, go upstairs. Lock the door. I'll be here all night. Arav took Dev's hand and led him up the stairs. And when their footsteps faded, Sundar sat back down, leaning forward, elbows on his knees, staring into the darkness outside. His phone buzzed in his pocket then. He pulled it out and saw a single message from an unknown number. You think you can keep him from me? You'll regret this. I promise. Sundar stared at the message, his jaw tightening, his mind already racing through possibilities. And then, through the silence of the house, came a faint sound from outside, the unmistakable crunch of footsteps. On gravel, he looked up slowly, heart pounding, and saw the faint shadow of a figure moving past the window. And just as he rose to his feet, the power went out. The house plunged into darkness. Asterisk, the lights went out all at once, not flickering. Not dimming, but snapping into blackness like a curtain dropping on a stage. Sundar stood still in the middle of the living room, every muscle tight, his ears straining in the silence that followed. The refrigerator's steady hum was gone. The faint tick of the wall clock was gone. The only sound now was the rain outside, soft but steady, and something else. The slow crunch of gravel outside the window. He reached for his phone instinctively, but as the screen lit up, it revealed his own face reflected back at him, pale and tense in the blackness. He glanced toward the staircase where the boys had gone earlier. "Arav," he called quietly. "Dev." There was no answer, only the faintest creak of the house settling around him. He moved toward the stairs, but stopped when another sound came, a faint tap on the glass of the front window. His head snapped toward it, and in the faint glow, from his phone he could see the silhouette of a man standing outside. Just beyond the glass, completely still, the figure didn't move. Just stood there. Sundar swallowed hard, his throat dry. His first instinct was to shout, to call the police immediately, but something told him not to. Not yet. This wasn't a man who cared about consequences. This was someone testing him, trying to make him crack first. He slipped his shoes back on silently, grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer, and clicked it on. A thin, white beam cut through the dark as he unlocked the back door, moving around the house into the yard. He stayed low, his breath misting faintly in the damp air. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the street beyond the house was empty, but he could still hear that sound. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling somewhere just out of sight. As he rounded the corner to the front yard, the beam of his flashlight caught something on the ground. A crumpled piece of paper weighted down by a stone on the porch step. He crouched and picked it up, his hands trembling slightly. The note was written in large, rough letters almost gouged into the page. "You don't deserve him. You don't deserve either of them. Walk away before you lose everything." His hands tightened around the paper until it tore in his fist. He glanced up sharply and saw that the figure was gone. Just like that dot when he stepped back inside, the power was still out. The air felt colder now, heavy and tense. He climbed the stairs slowly, the flashlight beam shaking faintly as it moved along the walls. He pushed open the door to Arav's room. Both boys were huddled on the bed, wide-eyed, clutching each other in the dark. Arav looked up at him immediately. "Papa," he whispered. "We heard him." He was outside the window. Sundar crossed the room in 2 long strides and knelt by the bed. "Listen to me," he said, keeping his voice calm though his chest still hammered. "You're both safe. I won't let anything happen to you." Dev spoke then, his voice so small it almost broke Sundar's heart. "He doesn't stop," he whispered. "He never stops." Sundar placed a hand on each of their shoulders. "He will this time," Sundar said quietly. "Because he's not just dealing with you anymore. He's dealing with me now." But even as he said it, a part of him knew this wasn't true yet. The man outside wasn't afraid of words. He wasn't afraid of threats. He was a man who thrived on control, and Sundar had just taken that away from him. And men like that don't walk away quietly. After getting the boys settled again, Sundar went back downstairs. He lit a candle in the kitchen and sat at the table, his thoughts racing. He couldn't sleep, couldn't sit still, but he also couldn't bring himself to call the police yet. He needed to know who he was really dealing with. So he opened his laptop using his phone's hotspot for internet. He started digging into records, names, anything he could find on Dev's father, court filings. Arrest records, property records. Piece by piece, a picture began to form. The man's name was Karan Malhotra. Multiple arrests over the years. Assault, threats, destruction of property, but always out on bail. A long history of violence, but no convictions that stuck. A reputation, Sundar realized, for making people afraid to testify. And then one detail caught his eye. A police report from just 2 years earlier. Karen had been charged with breaking into the home of another man who had tried to help Dev. The man had been hospitalized. No one had pressed charges. Sundar leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. Now he understood that Karen didn't just want to hurt Dev. He wanted to make sure no one else tried to help, but Sundar wasn't going to be intimidated. Not this time. He closed the laptop, stood up, and moved to the window. The rain had stopped completely now. The air was heavy and still, as though the whole neighborhood was holding its breath, and then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. A faint, reddish glow in the distance. He squinted, stepping closer to the glass. The glow brightened, flickering against the darkness of the night. His stomach dropped as he realized what he was looking at, that it was coming from the end of the street. Fire. Sundar yanked open the door and stepped outside, just as the smell of smoke hit him down the block. A car was fully engulfed in flames. Heat shimmered off the metal as the fire roared higher, crackling in the silence of the night. On the sidewalk near the flames stood a shadowy figure, watching the car burn. Even from here, Sundar knew who it was. Karen slowly turned his head, his eyes catching the light from the fire, his mouth twisting into a cold, deliberate smile. He raised his hand and pointed directly at Sundar, just one long, accusing finger, and then he mouthed the words, "You're next." The fire crackled louder. Now, and in the distance, Sundar could already hear sirens approaching, but Karen didn't move. He just stood there, staring at Sundar across the darkness, unblinking, as though daring him to step closer. Sundar's fists tightened at his sides. His jaw set. This was no longer just about Dev. This was about all of them now. He took one slow step forward, meeting Karen's gaze without flinching. And that was when he heard a sudden, sharp sound behind him. The shattering of glass. He spun around, his heart leaping into his throat, and saw that the window to the boys' room upstairs had been smashed from the outside. The sound of shattering glass tore through the quiet night, like lightning splitting the sky. Sundar's head snapped upward, his heart slamming into his ribs. The window of the boys' room, broken, jagged shards, catching the glow of the fire outside. Without thinking, Sundar bolted back into the house, his shoes barely gripping the floor as he took the stairs. 2 at a time. His breath came fast, but his mind was already focused, already calculating. ARAV, he called out. Dev. He burst through the bedroom door and froze. The boys were gone. The window gaped open, a cold wind blowing through the room, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke, and it's something sharp, metallic, like fear itself. His eyes darted to the floor and caught sight of footprints, muddy, smeared on the wooden boards, leading to the window, and something else too. A scrap of fabric torn from a shirt. AAAAV single quotes a shirt. Asterisk. The next few seconds passed in a blur. Sundar didn't feel the weight of his body as he climbed through the broken window, cutting his palm slightly on the glass but not even noticing. He landed outside in the grass, scanning the shadows, his flashlight beam slicing through the dark. He caught sight of them almost immediately. 2 figures moving quickly down the alley behind the house. One small and struggling, the other larger, dragging the boys roughly by their arm. Karen. Sundar single quotes. Breath came faster now, each step driving into the ground as he took off after them. His legs burned, but he didn't slow. Not for a second. The alley narrowed, flanked by tall fences and overgrown weeds. Karen glanced back once, his face illuminated briefly in the distant firelight, and for the first time Sundar saw something unexpected in his eyes. Not just fury, but desperation. He shouted after him, his voice echoing off the fences. "Let them go." Karen didn't stop. He pulled the boys faster, his grip like iron, ignoring their cries. Arav twisted and kicked, while Dev stumbled alongside him, too scared to fight. Sundar closed the gap. 10 feet, then 5. He reached out and grabbed Karen's shoulder, yanking him backward with all the strength he had left. Karen spun around, his fist already swinging. It connected with Sundar's jaw, sending a flash of pain through his head, but Sundar barely flinched. He steadied himself, squared his stance, and met Karen's glare head-on. "You don't scare me?" Sundar said, his voice low but steady. Karen snarled and lunged at him again, but this time Sundar was ready. He caught his arm, twisted it behind his back, and shoved him hard against the fence. Karen cursed, struggling, but Sundar held him there, his breath hot and sharp in the night air. "Look at them," Sundar hissed into his ear. "Look at what you're doing. You think this makes you strong? You think breaking them makes you a man? You're nothing." For the first time, Karen faltered. The boys had backed away, standing together now, watching wide-eyed. Sundar tightened his grip just enough to make his point clear. "This ends now," Sundar said firmly. And then came the sound of sirens. Closer now, filling the air, washing the alley in blue and red light. Neighbors had come out of there. Houses, some with phones raised, recording. The police car screeched to a stop at the end of the alley, and 2 officers jumped out, shouting orders. Sundar stepped back, letting Karen go. The man stumbled but didn't fight as the officers grabbed him, pinning his arms behind his back and snapping on the handcuffs. Karen didn't even look at Sundar as they led him away. His head hung low now, his anger swallowed by the weight of his own choices. When the alley felt quiet again, Sundar finally turned to the boys. Arav ran to him first, throwing his arms around his father's waist, burying his face in his shirt. Sundar wrapped him in both arms, holding him close. "You're okay," Sundar murmured, kissing the top of his son's head. "You're safe. I've got you." Dev stood a few steps away, still wrapped in the torn blanket, his face pale and unreadable. Sundar crouched down in front of him and placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "You too," he said softly. "You're not alone anymore. Not ever again." And for the first time since Sundar had met him, Dev's eyes softened. His lips trembled, and he whispered something barely audible. "Thank you." Sundar nodded, pulling him into the embrace with Arav. The 3 of them stood there in the alley for a long moment, the glow of the fire now just a memory behind them. The sirens fading into silence. Later that night, when the police had left and the boys were finally asleep, Sundar sat alone in the living room, staring at the faint line of dawn creeping over the horizon. His body ached. His jaw was bruised. His hands cut and sore, but his heart felt steady for the first time in weeks. He thought about everything that had happened. The whispers in the gym, the cruel names, the boy flinching under a tree. The man who thought fear was power. And he thought about how it ended. Not with shouting, not with anger, but with someone finally standing tall and saying, "Enough." When the sun finally rose, Sundar stood and walked quietly upstairs. He stopped at the boys' room, looking in at the 2 of them sleeping peacefully now, their faces calm and untroubled. He smiled faintly. Closing the door gently behind him. The next day, he walked Arav and Dev to school, together. As they entered the building, students stopped to stare, not in mockery this time, but in quiet awe. Teachers nodded respectfully as they passed, and in the gym, where it had all begun, Sundar stopped, turning to the boys. "You both belong here," he said simply. "Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." Arav slipped his small hand into Dev's, and they both nodded, walking forward into the room, shoulders a little straighter, heads a little higher. Sundar watched them go, his chest tight with pride and something deeper, a quiet knowing that sometimes the smallest acts of courage are the ones that change everything. He stood there a while longer, the faint echoes of laughter and footsteps filling the air before finally turning to leave. Outside, the sun was bright, the air clean, and for the first time in a long while, the world felt full of possibility again. And as he walked away, Sundar knew this was only the beginning, not just for the boys, but for everyone who had watched and learned and seen what respect really looked like. Because respect, he thought, isn't something you demand. It's something you show. And in showing it, you teach others to do the same. Asterisk.